this week we're going to take a little bit of a different tact and talk about neurodivergence and money, because it is quite an important topic. If you've been following some news recently, you would have heard that ex-Liverpool footballer Jermaine Pennant has been declared bankrupt. And when he gave interviews to talk about how this is possible, I mean, he's a footballer. He's earned thousands upon thousands, millions of pounds during his career. How do you end up being bankrupt after earning so much money? He blamed ADHD for his lack of ability to interface with money specifically, and not being able to make good financial decisions. He even forgot that he had a house in Cheshire. Now, how you forget you have a house in Cheshire, I don't know. Perhaps speaks to the volumes of wealth that he had acquired when he was a player. It's a very nice thing to forget you didn't have. But anyway, we're going to be talking about that today. We're going to be talking about money and ADHD and just generally neurodiversity, because I think it's really, really important for us to understand whether or not our mind actually has an impact on, I guess, the money decisions that we make. And I have an expert. Okay, I'm just going to read out the accolades here, okay? Her name is Crystal McGilvery. She is the founder of Mind Over Money. She is a behavioral finance specialist. She's a mentor, coach, also a chartered accountant, but she's also recently just won the award as the Great British Business Awards Rising Star. So I've known Crystal for some time. It's a pleasure to have her on again. Crystal, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Pete. The way you read that out, oh my gosh, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And just before we started recording, if you're listening to this, and especially if you're watching this on YouTube, I kind of said, well, we've known each other for how long now? What, 3 years,
I think
maybe?
for sure. Yeah, at least 3 years.
Like, your accolades have grown big time. Like, the list has got really, really long. So, and it's nice to see, because it's all about progression and evidence of progression as well.
Yes, and I can get quite aggressive with that stuff. So, yeah.
And so you should. You worked for it. It wasn't free. So give the viewers and the listeners a brief intro to you. I definitely haven't done you justice in that little brief accolade drop.
Thank you. I guess to bring it all together, my area is finance, behavioral finance, understanding how the mind works and how it affects your financial decision making. And of course, like the topic today, neurodiversity, and how that influences what you do with your money and you as a person. So I talk a lot about confidence. My company, Mind Over Money, does work with organizations and individuals on their finances, and we focus a lot on the psychological aspects of your financial decision making, not just kind of, here's a bank account, go and open one. And then on top of that, I'm a board director for 2 charities. I mentor. I'm part of plenty programs offering mentorship. I'm a coach. And I draw. Always put that in there because that's all that work stuff, but I have a bit of fun too.
All right, so let's jump straight in. Yeah. What does, when they say neurodiversity, what does that actually mean? Because it's quite broad in terms of what it actually covers, but what does it mean for those people who may not know?
Yeah, it's a word that I think majority of people are not familiar with. There's been so much more attention on it recently, which I think is wonderful, because that means people are getting support. And basically, it's a difference in the way that your brain functions cognitively, in terms of the wiring, how things connect up, what has high activity, low activity. All of that is slightly different in people who are neurodiverse, which then, as a consequence, as you can imagine, affects your behaviors. So affects what you do, whether it's socially, whatever it is, so that it starts in the brain fundamentally. And if we, in terms of understanding where it came from, no one's given a definitive answer, but you could think, or we think, genetics play a part, kind of trauma as well, kind of what you experienced as a young person. And like I said, the brain differences is where we see, when we do scans of the brain, we can see that the activity in a neurodivergent person is different.
All right. How so? How different is it? I mean, because obviously, as people are individuals, so you would imagine that brains don't necessarily have the exact neural pathways. There will be some, but I guess there are patterns that will emerge when you sample a large number of people in a group. So how different are the scans of the pathways when you find someone who's got a neurodiverse condition?
Yeah, it's a good question. And in terms of the brain, when we do certain things, certain parts of our brain are supposed to be more active for example, and other parts less active. For example, if you're trying to be get something done and focus on a particular task, a certain part of your brain is supposed to quieten down to allow you to just zone in and focus on that. And I'm sure here, those who are listening who do have ADHD and understand the issue with focus, that must be like a light bulb moment to you. Fundamentally, it affects the executive function of your brain. So this is things such as your working memory, your ability to plan, time manage. All of that stuff is affected, specifically in ADHD, as I think we're focusing on here. But if we think of other neurodivergent types, maybe autism, it maybe affects your ability to socialize and how you relate and understand signals. Again, going back to just the brain activity and how it differs to the neurotypical person. So that's the other.
That's really, really interesting. That's really, really interesting. I did sciences in school, so I find this really, really fascinating. And the ideas of, so actually, I would love to see a scan. I'd love to see my scan, because I think we were talking just before we press record here, that there are different conditions. So you've got ADHD, you've got autism, which you've already mentioned there. Dyslexia, I think, is one of them as well. And I was just sharing that this week I recorded my audiobook, and you'd never think that reading was so difficult to do. And in my case, and I haven't taken the dyslexia test yet, and maybe I should, because in my case, what I do is, because my brain is it feels like my brain is firing. I don't actually read the words. I read a collection of words, and then I try and make sense and connect them. So even when I'm reading something that I wrote, I know what's on the page, but I'm not reading the words, and I'm then substituting words because in my head I'm formulating what I know that I meant, and it meant that it took longer than it needed to. I got really frustrated with myself, and I probably do need to take the test. And I'll be interested to know whether I do have some form of dyslexia at age 43, if I do find out that I do. But I know that you've had your own experience of this as well.
Yeah, and I mean, hearing you talk about it, and like we said just now, I mean, I feel your stress and I get it. So yeah, I was diagnosed when I was doing my master's, and it started with a similar thing. I was reading a bit of text and I had to answer the question. It was a question basically, and you know, where you're sent a link and you answer anonymously via this link, and then we talk about it kind of 2 minutes later, and 3 weeks in a row, my answer was completely different to everybody else in the class. And there's like 30, 40 of us. So I'm like, okay, there's a serious issue here. Crystal, are you okay? Are you drunk? You didn't drink last night. Like, what's going on? So then I genuinely, I genuinely, and I share this, and I'm happy to talk about it, but I was actually worried, because I thought, if I'm getting the answer wrong, what, when I do the real examination, surely the same thing is going to happen. So yeah, I went to seek support, not thinking anything about dyslexia or ADHD, but they guided me through the gentle process. And hey, why don't you do it anyway? There you are. Yes, and it's interesting because, like we just touched on, and what I've achieved. I've got a bachelor's, I've got a master's, I've got a CMA qualification, which is equivalent of a master's, and I've done all these things. And people are often like, how are you good at finance? And you've studied so much, and you've got dyslexia and ADHD. And this goes back to the whole conversation of neurodivergence and the lack of understanding. It shows up in so many different ways. I love numbers. I found a way to tackle numbers and be great at it. And my dyslexia doesn't affect that. My dyslexia specifically is with memory and I've forgotten, processing of information. So I don't hear it very well, and I assume and I jump. So it shows up differently, but I can read and write, and I don't have problems. So it's really interesting, and I love talking about this because it gives lots of people light bulb moments.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, because I mean, what we could go on to talk about in a moment is how that actually impacts our financial decisions and the decisions we make with money.
Yeah.
I wonder, though, I'm interested to know this, because I think for a lot of people who would be diagnosed with something like dyslexia, for example, right? If diagnosed early, do you feel as though you've been able to do all the things that you've been able to do, and not knowing that you had that was a strength? Or do you think that maybe it would have held you back had you have been diagnosed earlier?
Really good question. I'm very proud of what I've achieved, and I will continue being aggressive. But I think I would be silly to say if this was diagnosed earlier, I would have achieved even more, done even better. My scores at school and stuff are not wonderful. They're good. They're okay. I've got to Warwick. Wonderful. But I've not done A star across the board, and I struggled a lot, whether it's socially or actually with the work. And there were lots of tears, lots of breakdowns. I had to resit my final year with my bachelor's. So I struggled for sure. And it's interesting because hearing me say that, I'm like, and no one ever thought to do an assessment, It's like, I had some real struggles. So for sure, I think if that diagnosis came earlier, I would have had so much more support. I say that ignoring the times and, how things have got so much better. But I've got, nieces and nephews and godchildren who are being diagnosed as young children, and I can see the change in their support, and it almost opens up a door for them to actually do more and not kind of sit in their struggle and kind of give up. And again, as much as I'm sharing my story here and talking about my achievements, remember it shows up differently in different people. So dyslexia is like the name, but some people struggle so much more, and that support can be really, really amazing.
Interesting. So, why is it that we have, if sticking with ADHD, for example, as a case in here, why does ADHD mean that sometimes it's difficult to make decisions, particularly when it comes to finances? Because again, going back to this example of Jermaine Pennant, he blamed his ADHD for not being able to, look at this stuff and pay attention to stuff and be able to make the right decision. How does that actually work in your experience around the decision making process, taking in the information when you need to make decisions with something as important as money?
Yeah, and that this is like the magic question, right? There are so many ways that ADHD shows up in your day-to-day life, right? Whether it's you ignoring something because it's too much to bear, or impulse. For example, we can easily see impulse spending. That's like an easy kind of connection. Or forgetfulness. You forget. This is what we're talking about with Jermaine, right? You forget. It's easy. And if we, and I'll list some more in a sec, but going back to possibly the reason or the causes of neurodivergence being trauma, some kind of an emotional attachment, we often, or some of us, forget things because of some kind of emotional situation going on there. So emotionally, we don't want to deal with it. It affects timekeeping. If we think of autism, there's meltdowns and shutdowns. And in those times, imagine you've shut down. So if you had a bill to pay or something to do, you're not dealing with it.
You're not there. Yeah,
you're not there, or lack of attention to detail. If we look at budgets and what's required there in money management, and that's where apps are really amazing, and there's so many of them because this is a common issue across the space of neurodivergence. And so something like forgetting your house, it sounds crazy on paper, right? What, you've forgotten this massive building? But actually take away the grandness of the size of the material that he's going about his day-to-day life. That then becomes a distant memory of something that he's not involved in every day. So it's easy to forget that, and then obviously your finances are affected.
I think it's really interesting where you put it there in terms of it manifesting in different ways and being perhaps a byproduct of trauma, and because it manifests in different ways and based on your background, your experiences, so on and so forth, it means that it will flare up at different times for different reasons. And so whilst we talk about and laugh about the fact that he forgot that he had a house in Cheshire, it may just be that he was going through a very, very stressful time during a particular period where he needed to make a few financial decisions, and that he's got a house in Cheshire just completely escaped him because he just needed to focus on maybe a coping mechanism to help him get through a certain period. And I think when you say this and we talk about this, one of the things that comes to mind is the fact that we always say that personal finance is personal, right? And being able to identify from a personal point of view, that when it comes to the decisions that you make and the choices you have in front of you, it is personal to you, yes, number one, but it's also very, very personal to the circumstances that you're in at any given time in order for you to make a good decision. And I think that's really, really an important message, I think, when we talk about this issue.
Yeah, you're spot on. And this term I like to use is called boundary rationality, which is where you, the listener, the viewer, you, Pete, you, I, we are, as we are right now, a complete result of what we've seen, what we've done, what we've experienced, what happened this morning, what we've eaten and how that's affected, us physically. All of those things get you to where you are right now. And how you act and the decisions that you make are a result of all of those factors. And it's, I've been speaking a lot about empathy recently and understanding yourself or accepting yourself and relating to others, because it goes back to that. There's so many factors that go into someone doing something or saying something or whatever it may be, and we need to have empathy with ourselves and with other people, and bring that to the forefront when we're trying to understand people.
I would agree with that. I think the world, it feels as though the world lacks empathy now, though, to be honest. I think social media has this whole facade on, this is what is kind of is expected, and then people want to, obviously, there's bravado on social media. And it's a shame, really, because I think you kind of lose sight of the important things. At the end of the day, we're people with our own struggles, and everyone has a struggle. It's not about looking good just for the sake of looking good for the gram. It's actually being attuned to what the circumstances around you, and appreciate that everybody goes through a journey. And even when you're struggling, you're going to have to call on somebody. You're going to expect empathy from somebody to help you get through.
Yeah, and it just makes me think about the whole finance space. And I think we've talked about this before, when the approach to people's finances, that some people are really quite harsh. We all make mistakes. I get things wrong all the time. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's my ADHD. I'm a human, whatever that means. I get things wrong, as do you, all of us. And that's okay. It's, I think more importantly, it's all about you trying to be better. That's it, no matter where you are. And then I think that's an important thing to kind of have at the forefront in this discussion when it comes to neurodiversity, ADHD. Even if you are diagnosed with those things, it doesn't matter. It's more about you understanding yourself. And then, okay, financially, where do I need attention? For me personally, where are my bad habits? What am I struggling with? What am I afraid of? And then going out and trying to sort those areas.
For the work that you've done now, then, do you think that there are any meaningful coping mechanisms specifically to help people with neurodiverse conditions to help them interface with money and make better decisions with money? Because I think a lot of the time it's all going to be about coping mechanisms, and maybe picking a particular time when you have the capacity to take on that information, to be in the headspace to make those decisions. But what have you found to be some good tips or things that people might find useful?
Yeah, I like that part. There's a part of that question that I really liked about ensuring you're in the right frame of mind, you're in the right state to, whether it's plan your finances or spend or whatever it may be. I think maybe the first thing that sticks out to me here is being self-aware of what's going on with you. Are you feeling upset? Has something happened where you're feeling, emotionally drained or high or low or whatever it may be? And is that possibly affecting how you're behaving right now in life? Obviously, here we're talking about in your finances. And I think that's something that's really key. And often, people aren't taught about money management, obviously, hence why your channel exists and it's amazing. But taking a moment to pause and assess yourself and understand, okay, what's going on for me psychologically? What kind of habits am I portraying here? What is it I'm doing with my money every week? And then, okay, what is it I want to do? And really getting clear about what's going on. And that we don't naturally do. We don't naturally, okay, I'm going to sit down, and it's not a thing that you learn at school. Your parents are unlikely to teach you to do that. So that's,
You don't put it in the diary and be like, I've got a date with myself
you
to,
don't.
figure out my money
You
situation.
don't, but you
Yeah.
should.
Yeah.
You should.
Yeah.
And
But we should. That's the whole point. We should.
Right. And I think those who don't automatically, like I'm sure you've heard, like budgeting being boring, right? Oh, budget, it's such a negative
Hmm.
connotation. And with the work I do, I turn it around. It's forget whatever the word is, but let's go back a step and let's get clear about why we're doing this. What kind of life do we want to have? Like let's make it how we want to make it, and starting there to build a positive view of this part of your life. I think is the one thing that definitely sticks out.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would be interested to know. Because there's a couple of things you mentioned there, and I think it is about headspace and it's about being aware of, I guess, your state at all times and being able to cope for it. And do you feel as though people who maybe have a neurodivergent condition, like money is already it's already complicated, it's already
Yes.
scary. Is there a possibility that people with these types of conditions would feel that actually this is just way too daunting? This is the last thing I want to be dealing with, because normal people feel like that at the best of times, let alone when you're aware that actually you don't necessarily process information as well, or you're not quite as confident. Do you think that's an additional barrier for people?
So it being yes is my lazy answer. So remember, with neurodivergence, what we're talking about here is a slight difference in the brain structure, right, and the brain functionality. And some of those symptoms are portrayed as emotional dysregulation, for example, or rejection sensitivity. So this is where, if something negative happens, you feel it much more deeply than, say, a neurotypical person. And it's funny, I was just kind of updating my list of articles to write, and one of them was about business. And I know this isn't about business as such, but for example, if you're trying to generate sales and maybe your business or whatever you're doing requires you to go out and seek sales, rejection sensitivity might mean that you're not as, happy to go out and possibly be rejected and told no. And then again, of course, we're going back to finance, that definitely impacts your finance. So yes, I think you're spot on.
I mentioned this in a section of my book where I talk about debt. So I spent a lot of time in debt, and in my book I talk about the fact that oftentimes when people go to apply for like a credit card or a loan, oftentimes there is a need. So I need this loan, I
Yep.
need this credit card because something is already
Yep.
pressing. And I recount a number of times where, and I don't know whether you felt like this, right? Applying for credit cards and credit and loans and personal and overdrafts, maybe it felt like such a big deal.
Mm.
And it's like, oh, if I get told no, what's going to happen? And even then, I was fearful of that. And you just talking about the fact of the fear
Mm-hmm.
of rejection, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. If you're already
Mm-hmm.
wired with that in
Yeah.
your head, imagine how much bigger that becomes when, oh my God, I need to go to a bank to apply for
Yes.
this money. You must feel it way
Yes.
more than just a normal person. And again, I can see how that then means that actually people are like, actually,
Yep.
no. I don't want to deal with this. This is the last thing I want to
You're
touch.
completely right. And it's like, a lot of my clients are neurodivergent in some way. Not all of them, but some. And yeah, the simple task of maybe going to your bank and talking to them is terrifying, and it's a process of getting them to understand that it's just another human. That's it, just like you, exactly the same. But it's a process, and there's more to it in terms of the explanation and understanding. But yeah, you're spot on. The world of finance and money is scary if you're oblivious or you're not educated on what and how things work. So then when you have those sensitivities as well, it's compounding. But I say that not as a dead end road, because there is a way through and out of that. Just because you have dyslexia or ADHD, or you are autistic, whatever it may be, it doesn't mean that, oh, this is how you handle your finances. Okay, sorry about that. No, not at all. And I say that from experience and the people I've worked with, especially when it's a creative ADHDer and they're terrified in the first session, they look white in the face because they're so afraid. By session 2, they're so excited. They're like, I can't wait to meet you. So there is a way through. And I just wanted to say that because it's easy to have this conversation, just focus on it being, a hindrance, and that's it, which is not the case.
Yeah. And thanks for saying that, because I think it is really, really important. Like, the whole purpose of the podcast is to empower and give information to help you be better.
Yeah.
And I think with everything, it's about understanding what your situation is and trying to figure out the best way out of it for you based on your
Yeah.
circumstances. One size does not fit all. And the reason why these kind of conversations are so important is because it might just allow you to think about things differently. It might have a light bulb moment that is that moment, that epiphany, that realization, like, actually, you know what? Something was said there that's interesting. That makes sense for me. Or actually, I know how I can figure this out. And long gone are the days where these kind of conversations would be swept underneath the rug and, never to
Mm.
be spoken about. We've got podcasts like this and shows like this to be able to open up this conversation. So again, it's all about encouraging you as viewers, as listeners, to, take the information in and really think about, how do you put your best foot forward? Because there'll be a lot of tools and coping mechanisms and apps, for example, that are
Mm.
out there to help you.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I just wanted to just jump back on your question about, different things that people can do or tools to help them with this stuff. And just another one, just related to what you said, actually, understanding how you work, I think, is key. So I have an example of somebody who wanted to save every month, and when we went through their finances to identify where were they spending so much money they didn't realize, and it was actually when they went out for a drink with their friends. Drinks are on me. They did that, although
Yeah.
although that £200 spend was kind of what their savings amount was supposed to be. So now they got no savings, and
Uh-huh.
they did that all the time. And some of this work is pretty deep, and it goes under the surface of just, here's your bank account. It's, when we started talking, it was, okay, so why do you do that? What do you think's going on there? And we kind of continued talking, and we started to see that actually it was about him feeling of value and feeling needed and wanted by his friends.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
He felt
And you know what? I love that. I love that example. I absolutely love that example
like,
because, even if you didn't have a neurodivergent
yeah.
condition, everybody feels like that. I know for a fact when I was in Canary Wharf, there were amount of times that I've been out with the boys and it's like, yeah, drinks on me. And then the bill comes and you're just like, shit, why did I do this? And you're immediately kicking yourself. But bravado, you want to be in with your mates, you want to make new friends,
You
you want
want
to
to
be
feel like the
accepted.
nice person.
You do those things on
Yeah,
impulse.
you do. Because again, what like what we're saying, go down some layers, go beneath the, oh no, I've overspent. Oh, I need to take, oh, I've got to use a credit card because I haven't got enough money. I need to buy this. Oh, go beneath that. Why did you get there? What's happening? And then what's the reasons for that happening? And once you tap into that, then you're almost there, because then it's like, okay, well, I'm seeking that validation. Okay, is there another way I can do it that doesn't involve me spending £200-300 every time I go out for a drink twice a month? There are other ways. And actually, now I feel empowered. Actually, when I go out for a drink, no, I don't need to buy you this, because now I know why I was doing it, and this shouldn't be how. It's a really beautiful epiphany moment, and all of us, you listeners, can do exactly the same thing. It's
Yeah.
empowering.
And you're preaching right now, and I absolutely love it, because again, I cover this in my book as well, because I talk a lot about my own experiences in the book, and I talk about how in Canary Wharf I felt I did certain things and I felt as though I needed to fit in. I didn't feel like I belonged there because I didn't have a university
Yep.
degree, and like I was working in a business where a lot of the guys had gone to university. They were very, very posh, and there's just me, and I'm like, I don't really fit in here. So you overcompensate because you don't believe that you
Yeah.
belong there on
Yep.
merit. And what that led me to do, and I explain this in the book, is I would then overcompensate in other areas as well around spending and so on and so forth. And it did take, right, I've got to journal and find out how I'm
Mm.
spending all of this money. And then what happened for me was when I was journaling all of this stuff, the pattern emerged. It was when I was around certain
Mm-hmm.
people, which turned into certain days of the week, which in Canary Wharf was a Thursday. So it's like, all right, The boys want to go out. We end up going out. It is always one beer to start off with. Oh no, but then it turns out to steak at Boysdale and a bottle of wine, and then maybe back into the city. Then all of a sudden it starts to ratchet up. I found out that in journaling it was, places that I
Yes.
used to go. So certain times of the month, if I was at a certain place, I would have an urge. And like you're saying there, understanding what your triggers are so important, because it allows you to then put in right that mechanism, that preventive. So on a Thursday I'll be like, actually I'm leaving the office early, or I'll be like, actually not this
Yeah.
week boys, not this week boys. And even though you'd have the peer pressure, you're sticking to your guns and stuff. And it's small battles, but small battles won essentially win the war. And that's what you want. You want to win the war at the other end of it. And those habits that you develop in that process, they're repeatable, they're transferable. And like you're saying, it's a really beautiful thing, but it's understanding what the issue is at the forefront.
And it just as you described it as well, it just made me think, the common rhetoric about budgeting and cutting spending and all that stuff is like, oh, dry, boring, not fun, I'm going to be the party pooper. Actually, when you go through this process, trust me, you are empowered. You're like, listen, I'm doing me. I'm a gangster. Yeah. I'm going to do what I need to do for me because I'm great. And once you have that reframing in your mind, you can do all that stuff that you thought was difficult, not spending here and actually allocating money here instead, and watching your savings, tracking it, watching it grow. It's like, after 6 months, look what I've done. It reframes it for you. And then all of a sudden your finances are like hella sexy. Which is what you want.
Exactly. And that's really what it's all about. It's not about, we need to get out of this cycle that we seem to be in, that peer pressure makes you make decisions. And it's not just peer pressure now, it's also social media, and I cover a lot of this in the book, and I'm going to give away so much of the book here, but I challenge people to think about the impact of social media and the decision-making process, because, when you think about consumerism, a lot of that is driven from peer pressure, social media specifically, but being in ownership of your space, of your mindset, it's so empowering, because it gives you that inner silent confidence that it's cool, I'm good, don't worry about it. It's like, I don't need to show off, I don't need to go out this weekend and blow a load of money. It's cool, I'm sweet, I've got my stuff locked down, like I'm on the right path. It's very, very strange to explain, but you do get it.
You do. And I feel like I've been having so many of these conversations recently, because that just makes me think of as well, kind of, to be able to do that, you have to believe that you are worthy of that. So to believe that you can acquire such assets, or earn whatever salary, or go on holiday a certain number, whatever it is that you kind of secretly desire to do, or whatever. And for me, and I think I shared it on my IG today, it's be around those people, be around those people that are doing that stuff, so you can relate and see that it's possible for you. And that also adds to motivation, as to make these changes, and then start to dig deep into, okay, what's making me do this stuff that isn't helping. Yeah.
So Crystal, how do the viewers and the listeners find you if they want to find you?
Yes.
Superstar,
thanks. You can either find me on my personal website, crystalmcgilvery.com, or Mind Over Money, which is wearemindovermoney.com. And I'm obviously on LinkedIn, Instagram, all of that good stuff.
Excellent. So I will leave links in the show notes if you're listening to this on the podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, it will be down in the descriptions below. Go check out Crystal. Really, really good work. Really good peeps as well. I really enjoyed this. And what I will do is I'm going to take a dyslexia test, because I'll be interested to know. And I'll let you guys know the results of it on the pod once I've taken it, to say, I don't know if it's a yes or no. I don't know. We'll find out. But yeah, I find it challenging sometimes, but it will be interesting if I am in busting the myth that you're not good with money if you have dyslexia.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting conversation.
We spoke about this. So yes, do it. That would be great for people to see.
Yeah. So who knows? But watch this space. I'll try and get a test done over the next few days before the next episode, and I'll keep you updated and do an episode specifically about that, whether it's a yes or a no. But guys, I appreciate you for listening and for watching. Remember, money's a tool, life is for living. If you've not ordered the book just yet, you can pre-order on Amazon. It is a paperback, it's an ebook, and it's also an audio book. So order whatever tickles your fancy. The links will be in the show note and the description on YouTube down below. Cheers, guys.